For 100 years, it was the symbol of aviation, the vertical stabilizer. The tail, it gave the airplane stability, it held the rudder, and it proudly displayed the squadron's colors. It was the shark's fin cutting through the sky. But in the unforgiving calculus of modern aerial warfare, the tail has become a liability. In fact, to a stealth engineer, the vertical stabilizer is nothing short of a traitor. It kills your stealth. It drags down your speed. And in a dogfight, it can actually stop you from maneuvering when you need it most. We are witnessing a quiet revolution. From the single tails of the Cold War to the iconic twin tails of the teen series, and now to the vanishing act of the 6th generation. Why are the world's superpowers spending billions to delete the tail? Is it actually possible to dogfight without a rudder? Or is this another tech fantasy that will get pilots killed? Today, we are looking at the evolution of the fighter tail. And trust me, it is a story of physics, compromise, and a desperate hunt for invisibility. Let's go back to the golden age, the 1950s and 60s. Look at the F-86 Sabre or the MiG-21. They are beautiful. They follow the DART principle. You have a fuselage, wings for lift, and a big vertical fin in the back to keep the nose pointing forward. Without it, the moment you fire a missile or hit a crosswind, the plane would spin flat like a frisbee. It's aerodynamics 101. The single tail was efficient. It was light. It created minimal drag. For an interceptor designed to fly straight and fast to catch a bomber, like the F-104 Starfighter, which is basically a missile with a man strapped to it, the single tail was perfect. But then, the Vietnam War happened, and the flaws of the single tail started to kill people. Here is the problem: high angle of attack. When a fighter pulls a tight turn, the nose comes up. The fuselage acts like a massive wall of wind. As the angle gets steeper, the body of the plane literally blocks the airflow to the single tail sitting behind it. It's called blanking. The rudder loses authority. The pilot stomps on the pedal to turn, but the plane doesn't respond. It becomes a tumbling brick in a knife fight with a nimble opponent. Losing yaw control means you die. The single tail worked for speed, but it failed for agility. The engineers realized that if they wanted to dominate the dogfight, one tail wasn't enough. They needed redundancy. They needed to move the stabilizers out of the shadow of the fuselage. Enter the 1970s, the era of the heavyweights. This is where we get the F-14 Tomcat, the F-15 Eagle, and later, the Soviet Su-27 flanker. Notice the trend? They all have two tails. Why two? First, aerodynamics. By splitting the surface area into two fins and pushing them out to the sides, at least one tail is always in clean air, even during a high-G turn. Second, control authority. The F-14 has variable sweep wings. When those wings tuck back, the center of lift shifts violently. You need massive tail authority to keep that beast stable. And let's be honest, the twin-tail design just screams power. It allows for the mounting of two massive engines spaced wide apart. It is the layout of air superiority. But, as always in engineering, there is no such thing as a free lunch. You fixed the maneuverability, but you introduced a new nightmare: weight and drag. Two tails mean more metal, more hydraulic actuators, and more friction with the air. The F-15 is powerful enough to brute force its way through the air, essentially bullying physics into submission. But look at the F-18. It uses twin tails, but they had to install leading-edge extensions just to energize the airflow over those tails, because even two tails were suffering from buffeting issues at high angles. We solved the agility problem, but we created a structure that was heavy and complex. And then, in the 1980s, a new variable entered the equation that changed everything: stealth capability. Here is the ugly truth about the vertical stabilizer. To a radar operator, a vertical tail is basically a giant mirror. Radar works by sending out energy. If that energy hits a flat surface perpendicular to the source, like the side of an F-15's tail, it bounces straight back. You light up on the scope like a Christmas tree. Even worse is the corner reflector effect. The 90-degree angle where the horizontal wing meets the vertical tail creates a trap for radar waves, amplifying the return signal. If your goal is air superiority through dogfighting, the twin tail is king. But if your goal is stealth, The vertical tail is public enemy number one. Look at the first stealth aircraft, the F-117. It didn't use vertical tails. It used a V-tail. The surfaces were canted heavily. Why? To deflect radar ways away from the sender. But the F-117 flew like a bathtub. It relied entirely on computers to stay in the air. If the computer crashed, the plane crashed. It had zero maneuverability. It was a compromise, not a solution. Then came the F-22 Raptor. The engineers at Lockheed Martin tried to have their cake and eat it too. They wanted the agility of the F-15 and the stealth of the F-117. So, they kept the twin tails, but they canted them. Those angled tails are a stroke of genius. They deflect radar. They are huge enough to provide control. Combined with thrust vectoring nozzles, they allow the Raptor to do things that shouldn't be physically possible. But here's the critique. The F-22 is still a compromise. Even canted tails are visible to long-wavelength radar. Modern anti-stealth radars, like the Chinese JY-27, are designed specifically to look for the physical structures of tails and fins. As long as you have a vertical protrusion on your aircraft, you cannot be broadband stealth. You are only invisible to some radars, not all of them. This brings us to today, the threshold of the 6th generation. The Air Force's F-47, the Navy's F-86, and China's J-36 and J-50. The leaked concepts and videos all share one startling feature: no tails. We are moving to the flying wing or lambda wing platform. We have seen it on the B-2 bomber, but the B-2 is a subsonic truck. It flies straight and level. It turns like a granddad driving a Cadillac. The goal now is to build a fighter that is tailless. A plane that can pull 9G turns, break the sound barrier, and dogfight, all without a rudder. But how do you turn a plane without a rudder? This is the hardest problem in aviation. Without a tail, a plane is inherently unstable. It wants to flip over and die. There are 3 ways to solve this, and each is a technological nightmare. First, split drag rudders. You put control surfaces on the wingtips that split open like a clam. If you open the left one, it creates drag, pulling the nose to the left. But it ruins your stealth when you open them. It kills your energy. It's clumsy. Then, thrust vectoring. You use the engine nozzle to point the thrust. If you want to turn left, you point the thrust right. But it only works well when the engine is running hard. If you are gliding or landing, you have less control. Also, 3D vectoring nozzles are heavy and maintenance heavy. And active flow control, this is the black magic. The future. Instead of moving parts, you use compressed air from the engine and blow it out of tiny slots on the wing. By changing the air pressure over the wing, you create virtual control surfaces. You turn the plane using sheets of air instead of metal. The advantage is 0 moving parts, 0 radar signature. But it is incredibly complex. If the system clogs or fails, you have 0 control. This brings us to the core conflict: the cost of perfection. Going tailless is expensive. We are talking about software codes that contain millions of lines, managing unstable flight dynamics thousands of times per second. The European FCS program is struggling with this. The debate between France and Germany often centers on requirements. Dassault wants a carrier-capable fighter, which usually needs tails for stability at low speed, while others want pure stealth. The US Navy recently paused its F-86 program to reevaluate. Why? Because landing a tailless fighter on a moving aircraft carrier deck in a storm is terrifying. You need instant yaw control to line up with the runway. If your virtual air rudder lags by half a second, you crash into the tower. But here's the skeptical take. Do we need a tailless fighter? In an age of missiles that can shoot over the shoulder, do we need to turn? If the NGAD is a sniper designed to shoot from 200 miles away, it doesn't need to dogfight. But history has taught us a brutal lesson. Every time we design a plane that doesn't need to dogfight, we regret it. We took the gun off the F-4 Phantom because we thought missiles were perfect. We were wrong. Pilots died. If we build a tailless 6th-Gen fighter that relies on stealth, and then the enemy develops a radar that can see it, we are left with a plane that cannot run and cannot turn. It becomes a very expensive coffin. There is one final piece to this puzzle: the pilot. A human pilot reacts in roughly 200 milliseconds. A tailless fighter is so unstable that it requires corrections every few milliseconds. The plane is not being flown by the pilot. It is being flown by the computer. The pilot is just voting on where the plane should go. We are reaching a point where the aerodynamics are so complex that human inputs are becoming the bottleneck. This is why the NGAD and the CCA are likely linked. The tailless design might actually be better suited for AI pilots. An AI doesn't get disoriented. An AI can manage the micro adjustments of active flow control perfectly while also tracking 20 targets. Perhaps the evolution of the vertical stabilizer isn't just about removing the tail. It's about removing the weakness in the cockpit. Think about it. We started with simple tails for simple planes flown by heroic pilots. We moved to twin tails for muscle cars of the sky. Now, we are removing the tail entirely, creating ghosts that are barely airplanes at all. They are flying computers wrapped in composite skin. So, here is the verdict. The evolution from single tail to twin tail to no tail is the story of the pursuit of the absolute edge. The single tail was about basic flight. The twin tail was about dominance and power. The tailless design is about survival. In the world of 2030, with hypersonic missiles and quantum radar, if you can be seen, you can be killed. The tail is the biggest reflector on the jet. Therefore, the tail must go. But I have to leave you with a question. A suspension of disbelief. Are we over-engineering ourselves into a trap? The Russians are sticking with the Su-57 and Su-35, highly maneuverable, twin-tailed beasts. They are betting that in a gritty, electronic warfare-heavy fight, where stealth might fail and sensors might jam, pure aerodynamic performance will still win. The US is betting everything on the Ghost. If the stealth holds up, the American design wins without a shot being fired back. But if the stealth fails, you have a fighter with no rudder fighting a Sukhoi that can dance on its tail. That is a terrifying prospect. What do you think? Is the tailless fighter the inevitable future or a fragile tech toy? Can software really replace a physical rudder? And would you want to be the test pilot who tries to land a tailless jet on an aircraft carrier at night? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.